Blue alerts can be used by state and local authorities to notify the public of threats to law enforcement and to help apprehend dangerous suspects. Specifically, the order would add a new 3-character event code BLU, Blue, to the Commission's Emergency Alert System rules. The Blue code will allow an immediately recognizable blue alert to reach the public through television, radio, and wireless phones. As I've mentioned previously, I am the granddaughter of a former detective in the Philadelphia Police Department. I appreciate the dangers that law enforcement officers face each day and the importance of protecting those who protect us. Today's order would support the Rafael Ramos and Wenjian Liu National Blue Alert Act of 2015, which was named for these two fallen New York City Police Department officers. Before we present the item, I would like to welcome the family and colleagues of the late detectives Ramos and Liu, who have traveled to be with us today. First, we will hear testimony from two family members of the late Detective Liu who are seated here, his father, Wang Tang Liu, and then Detective Liu's wife, Pa Shaw Chen, who will provide the family sentiments in English. Also seated with us is NYPD Sergeant Johnny Yin, who will serve as interpreter as needed. Next, we will hear testimony from Maritza Ramos, the wife of the late Detective Ramos. Also joining us at the table is William Bill Johnson, Executive Director of the National Association of Police Organizations, which represents about 1,000 professional police associations and units and 241,000 officers throughout the United States. It is a member of the Department of Justice's Blue Alert Advisory Group. I will now turn it over to Detective Liu's father.
Đại ca hậu.你说你这个，
你动一次，你动一个，
好，
动一个，
大家好。Một con bạn, hô vạn hàng, nề đi, dấu thấy người lại thăm con. Thường có làm sức cái gìกันphơi vào nào. Chỉ bảo là người thêm chỉ lớn ghê là giết thịt đánh nó một xiềng dầu mạnh chín cái chuyện cốc làm sức gì kính phải ổn chỉ phải ổn đó phải bảo truyền mỹ chấp pháp hiện人生命嘅法律我係劉文健嘅父母我相信啦，嗰個法案啦、參與啦，有幫助你更好保護執法人嘅安全。3年前嘅12月，我們嘅兒子劉文健和其拍檔嘅阿牧師執行公務時殉職。而家今晚咧參與嗰個法院，而下問嘅名度嚟問問，這是會劉文健同埋羅牧師最後嘅紀念同埋印記。另外，我多謝在3年來嘅全美嘅警察、政界與各界人士對我們嘅關心同埋關懷。同時咧，我感謝 要一市警總局嘅關懷同幫助。我又感謝我各國對我哋嘅兒子流民戰嘅不忘，更感謝咧各界對維憲從事着艱巨係咪危險嘅共督接翻現場嘅幹事，我哋愛家嘅支持，多謝。
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank you for having us here today. As a parent of Detective Wen Jianlu, we strongly believe this act will protect the safety of our law enforcement officers. 3 years ago, this month, my son, Wen Jian, and Detective Rafael Ramos died in the line of duty. Thank you for honoring their names in the act. This is the best way to remember them. In addition, we are also grateful to all the police elected officials and citizens who cared and helped us get through the past 3 years. We are grateful for the love and help the NYPD has given us. We thank you, everyone, for remembering our son, Wen Jianlu. We want to give special thanks to our law enforcement officers who put their lives on the lines protecting us every day. God bless America. Thank you.
I would like to start by saying an immense thank you to everyone who has worked hard to bring about the Rafael Ramos and Wen Jianlu National Blue Alert Act. Thank you to all the commissioners who will be casting a vote on this very important matter. I would like to extend my gratitude to the FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai, along with the National Blue Alert Coordinating Vince Davenport of the Department of Justice. I would also like to thank former President Barack Obama and former Vice President Joe Biden for their hospitality and for the signing of this act in 2005. My hope is that this alert will prevent another family from having to endure what my family has had to endure in the past 3 years. I truly believe that the work that has gone into making this act possible will save other officers' lives. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you. I would now like to introduce the members of my team from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau who are seated here. Nikki McGinnis, Deputy Bureau Chief, Gregory Cook, Deputy Chief of the Bureau's Policy and Licensing Division, and Linda Pentro, an Attorney Advisor in the Bureau's Policy and Licensing Division. Ms. Pentro will present the item.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Pai and Commissioners.
Good morning.
As Chief Folks mentioned, today's report and order would add a new Blue Alert Code, BLU, to the current list of authorized codes in the Emergency Alert System. The report and order finds that the Emergency Alert System would be an effective means of delivering blue alerts and that a dedicated event code would facilitate the implementation of blue alerts in a compatible and uniform manner nationwide. This report and order also enables blue alerts to be delivered over the wireless emergency alert system. As with amber alerts and weather alerts, it would be voluntary for state and local officials to send blue alerts, and voluntary for broadcasters and other emergency alert system participants to carry them. Specifically, this report and order establishes that a blue alert could be issued when a law enforcement officer is missing, seriously injured, or killed in the line of duty, or there is an imminent and credible short-term threat to cause death or serious injury to an officer. The suspect must still be at large, and there must be sufficient description of the suspect for the information to be actionable. This report and order encourages stakeholders to work together voluntarily to implement Blue Alerts as swiftly as possible, and it sets a schedule of 12 months from the effective date of the rules to enable the delivery of Blue Alerts over the emergency alert system, and a period of 18 months from the effective date of the rules to enable the delivery of Blue Alerts over the wireless emergency alert system. This implementation schedule would ensure that all stakeholders have sufficient time to address any technical, resource, and training needs for the successful delivery of Blue Alerts. The Bureau recommends adoption of the item and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mintro, for that presentation. Thanks as well, a heartfelt thank you to our other colleagues on the bench for your statements as well. We will now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Liu, Ms. Chin, Ms. Ramos. Mr. Liu, I did not need a translator to understand you this morning. I want to thank all of you for traveling to D.C. to take part in this event. Your son, your husband, served their community with great honor, dedication, and courage. I have no real words to bring comfort to you, but I am pleased to be able to honor you in a small way with the adoption of a rule to promote an alert where there is an incredible threat against a law enforcement officer. We honor their memories this morning in taking an important step to ensure that this agency, which number one mission is public safety, that we will aid you, aid their fellow officers when they're in the line of duty. An estimated 240 million calls are made to 911 centers each year. But when the need arises for one of us to make that dreaded call for help, it is our nation's first responders, your husband, and your sons who dedicated themselves. They stepped up. The officers step up, often at great risk to their own personal safety, in order to ensure our safety. For that, we will always be indebted. So I am thankful to be able to show my support for them to you through today's order, which revises the Commission's Emergency Alert System, or EAS, rules, adding a 3-character Blue Alert event code is the most effective means to share vital information in critical situations involving the serious injury or death of a law enforcement officer in their line of duty. It is our most effective means to provide aid to an officer who may be missing in the connection with his or her duties, or an imminent or credible threat that an individual intends to cause serious injury to or to harm a police officer. These words on the page seem so easy to read before meeting you this morning. But it is important that we do our part as a commission to update this EAS system to facilitate broader dissemination of information that can help keep our first responders safe. And as the City of New York and the National Association of Broadcasters have pointed out, issuing the Blue Alert via this EAS system has the added benefit of further protecting the public from violent suspects. Now I want to thank Lisa, Linda, the Public Safety Homeland and Security Bureau for their work on this important item. But I want to thank the three of you, supported by your law enforcement family, for coming here and reminding us of just how important, how vital our work is, our commitment is to each and every one of you and this entire nation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I associate myself with my colleagues' good comments there. Mr. Liu, I think you demonstrated to everyone that communications is more than just words. Hopefully our action today provides some small comfort to your family in this immense loss. I'll submit my longer statement, but suffice it to say, I hope and think that we should all pray that the need for this new code never arises. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. I also join my colleagues in the sentiments they've expressed this morning. Thank you all for being here today. With this order, the FCC does its part to help promote the safety of our nation's law enforcement officials and the communities they serve. Last year, 135 officers were killed in the line of duty. In many of the cases, the perpetrators posted imminent and credible threats to law enforcement officials ahead of time on social media, and some of them may have been thwarted by a coordinated National Blue Alert network. In 2015, Congress directed the Attorney General to create such a network within the Department of Justice and to support state and local law enforcement as they work to develop and implement Blue Alert plans. But the lack of a dedicated event code is one of the primary obstacles to more states using Blue Alerts. Indeed, the DOJ's COPS office has stated that creation of such a code is the single greatest need of the National Blue Alert network. In today's order, we therefore adopt a new dedicated EAS event code to enable the transmission of Blue Alerts over the EAS and wireless emergency alert systems. This action should facilitate the delivery of Blue Alerts in a uniform and consistent manner nationwide. In the process, increase the reach and effectiveness of these potentially life-saving warnings. I'm pleased the Commission is moving quickly to address this issue. I thank the staff, the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for their diligent work. And I also want to join my colleagues again in acknowledging and thanking law enforcement and their families, including those of Wenjin Liu, Rafael Ramos, for all that you've done and all you're doing to help keep us safe. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Today, the Commission honors Rafael Ramos and Wenjin Liu by fulfilling the promise of the National Blue Alert Act, which was signed into law by President Obama in 2015. We create a new emergency alert code, BLU, for use with our public alerting systems when a law enforcement officer is in peril. This new code and these 3 letters have the potential to save lives and increase situational awareness for our first responders. This is good stuff. It has my support. I am going to dissent, however, on one small aspect of today's decision. In evaluating the merits of the Blue Alert system that we adopt today, the Commission puts forward a cost-benefit analysis that weighs the cost of industry compliance against the value of a police officer's life. You heard that right. In deciding whether to impose a requirement under this law, the Commission puts a price on the death of first responders and then nets it out against industry expenses. Fortunately for law enforcement, the math works out. But this cold calculus is neither needed nor smart. There is a way to do cost-benefit analysis thoughtfully and with dignity for those who wear the shield, some of whom sit before us right here, right now. This isn't it. So on this disrespectful analysis, I dissent. But in closing, I want the family members who are here today to know that we cannot understand the depth of your pain. But we are so pleased you're here today to honor your loved ones. Thank you.
Before I begin my formal remarks, I also want to thank the families of Officers Liu and Ramos. I want to thank you for your courage in being here today. And I also want to thank you for sharing some of your time with me this morning. Being able to hear your stories firsthand, being able to see a picture, Ms. Chen, on your phone of your 5-month-old daughter, who will never have a chance to see her father, but whose likeness bears a direct resemblance to that brave soul, was a privilege beyond measure. Thank you for your sacrifice and for being here today. We typically give thanks and celebrate with family and friends during the holidays. But for Maritza, Justin, Jaden, and Angelina Ramos, Cindy Gonzalez, Peixia Chen, Weitang Lu, and Shu Yan Li, who I had a chance to meet as well, every Christmas over the past 3 years has been one more painful reminder of the loss that they suffered on December 20th of 2014. For it was on that day, less than 1 week before Christmas, that detectives Rafael Ramos and Wenjin Liu of the New York Police Department were senselessly gunned down while on duty. They were doing what they loved to do and what they were proud to do, protecting the citizens of New York City. Their dedication exemplifies what it means to be a public servant, to improve their communities and the lives of others, despite the inherent dangers. Detective Ramos, a dedicated Mets fan who had a taste for ham and cheese sandwiches, once told a fellow church member that he wanted to bring something more to the uniform. He sure did. Detective Ramos was scheduled to graduate from the New York State Chaplains Task Force the day after he lost his life. For his part, when Detective Liu was once asked why he wanted to be a police officer, he replied, and I quote, "I know that being a cop is dangerous, but I must do it. If I don't do it, then who is going to do it?" Detectives Ramos and Liu made the ultimate sacrifice. We owe them and their brave family members who have come here today a tremendous debt of gratitude. We cannot begin to fathom your pain, but we can honor your sacrifice. And the FCC attempts to do that today by adopting rules so that police officers across America and the communities they so proudly serve will be better protected. Specifically, we are creating a dedicated Blue Alert event code in the emergency alert system. Similar to the Amber Alerts that many are familiar with, Blue Alerts will enable authorities to warn the public when there is actionable information related to a law enforcement officer who is missing, seriously injured, or killed in the line of duty, or when there's an imminent threat to an officer. These warnings can be sent to the public through broadcasts, cable, satellite, and wireline video providers. Officials may also send Blue Alerts through the wireless emergency alert system to consumers' wireless phones. We aim to promote compatible and integrated Blue Alert plans throughout the United States, consistent with the Rafael Ramos and Wenjin Liu National Blue Alert Act of 2015. 6 months ago, at the Department of Justice, I made a promise to adopt these rules, and I'm pleased that my fellow commissioners and I make good on that promise here today. Obviously, what we do here doesn't change what happened that sad afternoon in New York, but it does respect these officers' spirit and courage. I want to thank William Johnson, Executive Director of the National Association of Police Organizations, for his advocacy and support for Blue Alerts, and especially the family members who are here today. I also want to acknowledge the unwavering support from members of the U.S. Department of Justice's Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, who have joined us this morning. Acting Director and National Blue Alert Coordinator Russell Washington, Deputy National Blue Alert Coordinator Vince Davenport, Senior Counsel to the Director Shanetta Cutler, and Blue Alert Team Leader Tracy Johnson-Farrell. I also want to extend a special thanks to Deputy Chief Thomas Burns, Commanding Officer of the NYPD Employee Relations Section, and his staff, Lieutenant Deborah Lott, Sergeant Patrick Whalen, and Officer Frank Russo. Each of them plays a very important role in consoling grieving family members of fallen NYPD police officers. I'm also grateful to Detective Jose Falero and Sergeant Johnny Yin from the NYPD for safely escorting our guests this morning all the way from New York. And last but not least, for their tireless efforts and dedication to keeping the American people safe, I want to thank our fantastic staff of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Rochelle Cohen, Greg Cook, Lisa Folks, Nikki McGinnis, Linda Pintro, Austin Randazzo, and James Wiley, and Anjali Singh and David Horowitz from the Office of General Counsel. Thank you for all you've done to get us to this step today. With that, we will call for a vote. Commissioner Clyburn.
Aye.
Commissioner Riley.
Aye.
Commissioner Rokar.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Approve in part, dissent in part.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks to all of you for your presentation and for your dedication to this effort. Their memory will not be forgotten. Thank you. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the second item on your agenda, entitled Promoting Telehealth in Rural America, will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. Chris Monteith, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ms. Monteith, if you and your team are ready, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
It's very difficult to follow such a moving presentation on such an important issue. The Wireline Competition Bureau presents this morning for your consideration a notice of proposed rulemaking in order that launches a review of the Commission's rural health care program. This item seeks to improve the program's efficiency and promote access to vital telehealth services in rural America. I would like to thank the Telecommunications Access Policy Division's team for all their hard work on this proceeding. Our colleagues in the Enforcement Bureau and in the Offices of Communications Business Opportunities, General Counsel, Legislative Affairs, and Managing Director also provided us with invaluable input. With me at the table are Trent Harkrader, Associate Bureau Chief, and from WCB's Telecommunications Access Policy Division, Ryan Palmer, Division Chief, Radhika Karmarkar, Deputy Division Chief, Sumitra Das, Telecommunications Analyst, and Preston Wise, Attorney Advisor. Preston will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. The FCC's Rural Healthcare Program supports access to vital communications and telehealth services in rural areas, helping those in remote communities access high-quality healthcare and overcome the challenges of hospital closures and shortages in medical professionals. For the second year in a row, however, program demand is likely to exceed available support, leaving participating healthcare providers with unanticipated funding reductions. While advances in healthcare technologies have contributed to growth in the program, this budgetary shortfall may also be attributable to current program rules that promote inefficient purchasing decisions and create opportunities for waste, fraud, and abuse. If adopted, this item would initiate a rulemaking to review the rural healthcare program. The notice of proposed rulemaking would first seek comment on whether to increase the rural healthcare program's current annual $400 million cap and how to prioritize funding should demand exceed the cap in future years. It would then seek comment on proposals to promote efficiency in the program and to curtail waste, fraud, and abuse. These proposals include establishing a process for evaluating outlier funding requests and streamlining the calculation of urban and rural rates, redefining the cost-effectiveness standard across the rural healthcare program to encourage a more transparent and fair competitive bidding process, ensuring sufficient funding for rural and tribal healthcare providers, and ways to simplify program participation and enhancing oversight to, for example, establish rules on the use of consultants, gift restrictions, and invoicing deadlines, among other matters. The order would grant targeted and immediate relief to rural healthcare providers facing potential cuts in funding year 2017. Specifically, it would waive the rural healthcare program's cap on a one-time basis by instructing USAC to carry forward any unused program funds from prior funding years for use in funding year 2017, and it would enable service providers to voluntarily reduce their rates for qualifying funding year 2017 requests while keeping constant the support amount provided by the Universal Service Fund. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits.
Thank you, Mr. Wise and Ms. Monteith. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner Clyburn.
When a patient is presenting symptoms of a stroke, physicians have a saying, time is brain. Minutes can make the difference between full recovery and severe permanent damage. That is why the University of Virginia hospital system has put telestroke functionality in ambulances. By ensuring life-saving treatment can begin immediately, the program ensures that strokes are caught at the absolute earliest possible time. This advanced technology would not have been deployed organically, according to the system's director of telehealth. The director stated just a few months ago that absent the rural healthcare program, our ability to provide these services would be severely constrained. Whether it's telepsychiatry solutions for individuals in need of help, or the enabling of remote radiology readings to promote and speed the quality of healthcare, the FCC's rural healthcare program has been a key plank undergirding the modernization of healthcare delivery. Unfortunately, as the FCC's own Connect to Health Task Force has found, most of the counties with the worst access to primary care physicians are also the least connected. And this holds true in both urban and rural areas. That vulnerable grandmother who spends over 2 hours on that local bus system to see a doctor can benefit just as much from telehealth as her rural counterpart. We need to do better as a country, and that can start with a fresh look at our rural healthcare program. Everyone stands to benefit if this program matches the needs of healthcare providers with the patients who rely on them. That means looking at everything from top-line funding levels to the nuts and bolts of program administration. The potential here is huge if we simultaneously reduce healthcare expenditures and improve patient outcomes, but we must get it right. That is why I am pleased my colleagues agreed to include further lines of questioning in the notice of proposed rulemaking. We expand the inquiry to seek comment on how we can incorporate what we have learned from our Connect to Health Task Force. We look at how best to improve transparency and on how to equitably administer the program in the event funding requests cause us to hit the cap yet again. And we look to understand whether and how to support remote monitoring consistent with our statutory mandate. I always say that we need to make the business case for each and every one of our policies. This rural healthcare program is one where making the business case is incredibly easy. The program saves lives. It reduces costs and results in a healthier nation. Telemedicine consults with high-risk mothers result in an almost 40% reduction in the amount of infant days in NICU. And it is here especially, and I have a personal story to tell about this with a nephew who looks fabulous today but spent 3 months of his life in NICU, where the value proposition is both precious and crystal clear. This item has my enthusiastic report, so I thank the Wireline Competition Bureau for your thoughtful work on reforming the Rural Healthcare Fund. I look forward to continuing to engage with you as we move towards an order that will be a major driver in improving access and outcomes when it comes to healthcare, telehealthcare, telemedicine in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and for your leadership on the Connect to Health Task Force.
Thank you for your support in that.
Absolutely. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll submit a longer statement, but I've seen firsthand the role that the rural health care program can play in promoting the health and safety of Americans in some of the more and most remote parts of the country. One of my first trips as a new commissioner was to Alaska, a telemedicine pioneer and a hotspot by necessity. As I traveled to isolated villages accessible only by air, I saw health aides use what I've called technology triage to assess patients and forward relevant health information to larger facilities in regional cities in Anchorage. While that experience helped illustrate the benefits of the program, I've also had a chance to witness its shortcomings. For years, regulators and recipients complained that the program was underutilized, meaning that it didn't spend every last dollar allowed under the budget cap. Therefore, a prior commission expanded the program to include broadband and marketed the heck out of it. Pushing dollars out the door quickly took precedence over cost effectiveness, and not surprisingly, spending increased rapidly. To be sure, most of this funding has been used for intended purposes, to provide discounted connectivity to rural healthcare providers, improving access for more consumers. However, in some cases, it has been used to buy more capacity than what's actually needed, overbuild other rural providers, and connect sites that were not originally intended to be part of the program. I implored the last commission to put a plan in place, chairman, to put a plan in place to address the spending increases, but my requests were ignored. Now, demand exceeds the cap, and we are left playing catch-up. However, that cannot be an excuse to spend more and reform later. Fortunately, the notice seeks comment on ways to root out inefficiencies and target support where it's needed most. Indeed, I am pleased to see cost-saving ideas from other programs included in the notice. In particular, the item seeks comment on excluding certain expenses outright, examining whether these services are used and useful, and capping or limiting support that exceeds a specific threshold or reasonable comparability benchmark, issues I've spent a great deal of time on in the high-cost program. In fact, I think we're getting real close to announcing new limitations on the extraneous uses of ratepayer funding by rate of return providers. The item also seeks comments on prioritizing certain areas, including based on economic need, which sounds a lot like the means testing concept that Commissioner Clyburn and I have urged the Commission to at least seek comment on in the high-cost program. At the same time, the notice does ask about increasing the spending cap above the current $400 million. I have several concerns with such approach. As a threshold matter, it is my hope that improving program efficiency and targeting of the funds will alleviate or at least decrease the need for more of it. In addition, there seems to be an underlying assumption by some that the budget should be set solely by healthcare demand. That is simply not the right approach. We are not a healthcare agency, and we aren't even part of that realm. What we do through the rural healthcare program can help provide savings on the healthcare side, but we do not have insight into, nor do we recoup any of the savings to help offset our costs. Our job, according to the statute, is to provide a discount to help make already available service more affordable. Funding new networks that potentially overlap and undermine existing infrastructure is expensive and can be wasteful. We have to keep in mind that the Federal Universal Service Program is already authorized to spend approximately $11 billion per year, and there's no shortage of requests for additional funding, as recipients from each of the 4 programs have requested even more. Instead of looking holistically and finding the necessary offsets, the Commission has tended to increase funding at the expense of consumers. It is time for the Commission to decide how much we reasonably and justifiably should take from ratepayers, then set an overall budget for USF and individual program budgets accordingly. Just recently, some suggested that a separate Commission action was akin to taxing on consumers. But this is actually one, if not officially labeled as one. Hardworking Americans and businesses are charged extra fees on their phone bills in order to fund these programs. There must be a limit on how much we are willing to take from them, no matter how meritorious the spending could be. So let me be clear. I will be extremely reluctant to increase the budget for the rural health care program in any final item without corresponding spending reductions elsewhere. I thank the chairman and the staff for working with me to include additional questions on the impact of funding increases on consumers. I'm also pleased that the order makes clear that any price reductions undertaken by service providers to help address the current shortfall will be completely voluntarily. I vote to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. At the FCC, we are focusing a lot of our efforts on closing the digital divide. One area where that divide is particularly stark is healthcare. Americans living in rural communities are falling behind when it comes to the availability of high-quality care. It's difficult to impossible to find specialists in many rural communities, and even basic care is often out of reach as we see rural hospitals closing by the dozen across the country. The FCC's rural health care program can help make a difference. This program uses money that consumers pay into the Universal Service Fund to subsidize the costs of connectivity that consumers in rural communities need for telemedicine and other advanced healthcare services. But unfortunately, this program is not living up to its potential. Our rules and the incentives they create are not serving the best interests of rural healthcare providers, the communities that depend on them, or the consumers that pay into the Universal Service Fund. At a time when the program is more important than ever to a growing number of rural communities, it's been heading in the wrong direction. In what is known as the telecom portion of the program, we've been spending more money to serve fewer and fewer healthcare institutions. Over the last 3 years, for example, the number of participants in the program dropped by 36%, while requests for funding grew by more than 67%. This means that limited program dollars are starting to concentrate in a small number of healthcare providers that are receiving increasingly large subsidies. Indeed, in 2016, just 5% of the participating healthcare providers received more than half of the available support. In addition to concentrating USF support in fewer communities, the program's trend lines are unsustainable for another reason. It does not encourage or incentivize prudent spending. The 5% of providers that now receive the lion's share of support are getting discounts of over 99% on their services. And the effective program discount has risen from 72% in 2011 to 95% last year. It's no surprise then that demand exceeded the program's budget for the first time in 2016, and that we're expecting to see the same outcome in 2017. So I'm glad the Commission is launching this proceeding to review the program. It's important that our rules incentivize the wise and prudent spending of program funds while ensuring that more Americans, regardless of where they live, have access to advanced telehealth services. As part of this inquiry, I'm pleased that we're now seeking comment on whether to adopt speed or other service benchmarks to ensure that supported services can in fact be used to bring telehealth offerings to rural communities. With this and the range of other questions we tee up, I'm confident that we can craft rules that will promote efficient purchasing decisions. In the interim, I support our decision to provide some immediate relief to healthcare providers that could otherwise face unexpected costs if the program exceeds its budget cap again this year. By waiving our rules, we allow service providers to voluntarily reduce their rates, which can help ensure that rural communities continue to receive service. So thanks to the staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau for your work on this item. It has my support, and I look forward to reviewing the record as it develops.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
I've seen the future through a pair of virtual reality goggles as alarms were blaring in my ears and supervising physicians were urging me to administer CPR in order to save a patient. Now, I'm not a doctor, nor do I play one on television, but I got to see the future of medical care at the Simulation Training and Education Lab in Northwest Washington, where video game developers work hand in hand with researchers and clinicians to develop training for the MedStar health system. It turns out virtual reality can improve training by leaps and bounds, reducing real-world errors and improving patient outcomes. This is especially true for practitioners in rural and remote areas who lack the resources for regular in-person consultation and training with colleagues. But virtual reality requires bandwidth, and lots of it. Yet today, the Commission program dedicated to ensuring that that bandwidth reaches rural healthcare providers is stretched thin and about to break. There's an honest reason for that. When this program got its start 2 decades ago, neither connectivity nor medicine looked a lot like what they look today. Virtual reality, prescription vending machines controlled by doctors at a distance, and electronic health records were really just the stuff of science fiction. But as I saw at the lab in Washington, today these things have become standard medical training and practice. That's why I am pleased to support today's rulemaking. It examines how to future-proof the Commission's rural health care program, and at the same time it seeks comment on how to responsibly manage the program budget, and to this end it asks some important questions about prioritization. It also seeks comment on improving incentives to promote more efficient decision-making among funding recipients. I am looking forward to the record that develops, and I'm also looking forward to seeing how we can use this program to speed the way for the future of medical care. That would be good news for both patients and practitioners, and also good news for rural America. Thank you to the Bureau for your work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Often in the early mornings, starting in the late 1970s, a doctor in the small town of Parsons, Kansas would hit the road. He would drive long distances across southeast Kansas to make sure that patients in even smaller surrounding communities could see a physician who could help them. That was my dad. And even into adulthood, I remain amazed at the many, many road miles that he has logged in his career. But his upcoming retirement brings into sharp focus, for me, some difficult general trends. It's becoming harder to recruit doctors and to keep them in these rural communities. It's becoming harder to keep rural hospitals afloat. And so it's becoming harder for rural patients to get health care. Ironically, at a moment when vital signs for those patients and rural America generally are suggesting trouble. That's what makes the combination of the internet and rural medicine, call it telemedicine or telehealth if you like, so critical. With a broadband connection, healthcare providers in small-town America can deliver the same quality of healthcare as those in our nation's big cities. And the FCC can and does promote this potential. Our rural healthcare program helps healthcare providers afford the connectivity they need in order to better serve their patients. But it's facing some real problems. First, the program is oversubscribed. The yearly demand for funding now exceeds the annual spending cap. And second, there may be substantial waste, fraud, and abuse in the program. Recent enforcement activity has shown that it is all too easy for unscrupulous companies to manipulate the system for their own profit at the expense of the American taxpayer and the rural healthcare providers that truly need support. So in this notice, we tackled two key issues. What size should the program be going forward, and how can it function more effectively? Every dollar in this program needs to be stretched as far as possible to help those in need in places like southeast Kansas. Thank you to the staff who have worked on this item, specifically Dana Bradford, Regina Brown, Sumitra Das, Mary Beth DeLuca, Trent Harkrader, Belford Lawson, Radhika Karmarkar, Dave Corey, Paul LaFontaine, Billy Layton, Jonathan Lecter, Travis Littman, Rick Mallon, Elizabeth McCarthy, Maura McGowan, Avis Mitchell, Chris Monteith, Linda Oliver, Ryan Palmer, Rakesh Patel, Carol Pomponia, Eric Ralph, Bill Richardson, Ariel Roth, David Sabatkin, Jeffrey Waldo, and last but certainly not least, our presenter, Preston Wise. With that, we'll move to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
Commissioner Carr.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Approved.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks to the staff for the fantastic job. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the third item on your agenda will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. It is entitled Review of Co-locations on Certain Towers Constructed Without Documentation of Section 106 Review, and Don Stockdale, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Stockdale, whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I am pleased to present to you a public notice seeking comment on a plan to exclude from his routine historic preservation review the co-location of wireless communications equipment on certain towers known as twilight towers. I'm joined at the table today by Suzanne Tétrault, Garnet Hanley, Jeff Steinberg, and Dan Margolis. In addition to the WTB staff at the table, I would like to thank Paul Dari, Eli Johnson, and Jill Springer from our Competition and Infrastructure Policy Division for their work, and all of the Commission staff listed on the slide for their input. Dan will now present the item.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Good morning.
This public notice would continue the Commission's efforts to streamline wireless infrastructure deployment by seeking comment on a definitive solution for expediting equipment co-locations on so-called twilight towers. Twilight towers are towers that were constructed between March 16, 2001 and March 7, 2005 that either did not complete historic preservation review or that cannot be documented to have completed such review. During that time period, the Commission's historic preservation rules required licensees and applicants to evaluate whether proposed facilities may affect historic properties. But the text of the rule did not specify a particular process that parties were required to follow. The National Historic Preservation Act requires every federal agency, before allowing an undertaking within its jurisdiction to proceed, to consider the undertaking's effects on buildings and sites that are eligible for protection as historic properties. The Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, or the ACHP, has established rules governing the process for conducting historic preservation review. The Advisory Council also has the authority to adopt program alternatives that may be used by federal agencies to exclude from review particular types of federal undertakings that have minimal potential to adversely affect historic properties. Under one such program alternative, the Nationwide Programmatic Agreement, or NPA, for co-location of wireless antennas, most co-locations on towers that themselves underwent historic preservation review are excluded from any further review. But since Twilight Towers lack the documentation of any prior review, co-locations on Twilight Towers are not eligible for the co-location NPA's exclusion from historic preservation review. This public notice seeks public input on a type of program alternative, a draft program comment, that would facilitate co-locations on Twilight Towers by generally excluding from the historic preservation review process co-locations that meet certain specified conditions. If adopted by the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, this draft program comment would make potentially thousands of existing Twilight Towers available for co-locations without the need for either the co-location or the underlying tower to complete historic preservation review. The draft program comment thus treats these Twilight Towers like older towers constructed before March 16, 2001, which are already excluded from the historic preservation review process. The Wireless Telecommunications Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges to make technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Margolis. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. Our best estimates show today that there are just over 4,000 Twilight Towers across the United States. To those outside of the world of the communications bar, be happy. Sorry, those in the communications bar. But these are wireless towers for which the historic preservation review process may or may not have been completed. Now, I am sure that those who worked on the 2001 and 2005 nationwide programmatic agreements could not have imagined that mysterious and frustrating questions about the legality of these towers would be the subject of a 2017 proceeding. Nevertheless, as someone's phone goes off, yes, I did tell on you, the approach we are taking through today's public notice seeks to resolve what has become a confounding issue. Program comments present an alternative, streamlined procedure for a co-location applicant to comply with the historic review requirements. In 2013, as acting chair, I saw firsthand how effective program comments could be when I directed the staff of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau to prepare and release one to address towers to deploy positive train control communications. It is important that we design program comments to ensure that tribal nations have a full opportunity to participate in the review of a proposed co-location. In our April 2017 NPRM on facilitating wireless infrastructure deployment, we discussed how tribal nations have expressed concern that some of the Twilight Towers, which were constructed between 2001 and 2005, may have effects on properties of religious and cultural significance. So I am glad that this program comment makes clear that a tribal nation may request direct government-to-government consultation with the FCC at any time with respect to a Twilight Tower or co-location. I thank the Bureau for their work on this proceeding and we'll ask forgiveness to the Bureau Chief for letting everyone know that that was his phone that went off. Thank you.
Fortunately, no one's watching, right? Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. None of us currently on the Commission caused the Twilight Tower situation, which originated back in the early 2000s. Instead, we get the job of cleaning up the mess. Today, we take a decisive first step to do just that. Once complete, our resulting actions will expedite certain antenna co-locations, reduce the need for additional macro tower construction and placement, facilitate the expansion of wireless networks including FirstNet, and improve the wireless experience for consumers. Having toiled on this issue for several years, I'm well aware of some differing perspectives and views on what best to do with Twilight Towers. Over that time, I've explored assorted options and participated in countless conversations over possible solutions, seeking resolution while demanding a realization of the realities. I've pushed Commission staff, many of whom are no longer here to see this conclusion, to expedite consultations and craft a draft order expeditiously. And I know there have been endless discussions, consultations, negotiations, workshops, and conferences with staff and stakeholders over the years that never resulted in a resolution of the problem. All of this preceding work, however, has led us to this public notice, and I want to thank the Chairman and Commissioner Carr for their leadership in making this issue one of the early action items for removing infrastructure barriers. This PN is an incredibly positive step forward to address the regulatory purgatory faced by those owning so-called Twilight Towers. These towers, some 4,300 or so by most estimates, as Commissioner Clyburn highlighted, have been in operation bringing wireless service to American people for somewhere between 12 and 16 years. At the same time, owners of these towers, many of which have been since sold, have been stuck, unable to accept co-locating partners while policymakers wrestle with the fact that the requisite historic preservation reviews were not documented. In fact, it is estimated these towers could accommodate an additional 6,500 antennas. Consumers have been prevented from the many benefits from fully loaded towers, including increased network coverage. Since I'm aware of no one that possesses a time machine in order to go back and conduct the reviews pursuant to Commission rules in place today and not back then, we must operate in the present with the facts as they are, not how we may like them to be. Basically, these towers already exist, and in most cases, tough one there, were never subject to, to a complaint. It would take millions of dollars and years to create a list of all the Twilight Towers and have them individually reviewed. And in the meantime, these towers would continue to be underutilized to the detriment of consumers. With this in mind, as well as the realization that the Commission will not undertake enforcement action against tower owners for the uncertainty caused by our own doing, the public notice takes the most appropriate action by establishing a draft program comment for consideration by the ACHP. Specifically, the contents of the draft program comment would exclude co-locations of wireless facilities on Twilight Towers from Section 106 review. In effect, we are moving forward and closing the sad chapter in regulatory history. I thank the Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. Today we take another significant step in our ongoing effort to accelerate and streamline the deployment of wireless infrastructure. Specifically, as we've heard, we propose to resolve what's been a long-standing issue with Twilight Towers. The approach we adopt today will culminate in the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation adopting a document known as a program comment that would exclude co-locations of communications equipment on Twilight Towers from routine historic preservation review. This action could open up thousands of towers for the deployment of new wireless facilities. As such, these towers would be treated similarly to older towers that are already excluded from historic preservation review. We also make clear that the agency will not take enforcement action against Twilight Towers that were constructed in good faith. This clarification further removes the regulatory uncertainty that has hung over these deployments for far too long. I'm grateful as well for the engagement that we've seen on this issue. In response to public input, we make clear in the draft program comment that where a proposed co-location on a Twilight Tower is not excluded from historic preservation review, Such review will be limited to the co-location itself and not the underlying tower. We also clarify the standard under which the FCC will treat a request for direct government-to-government consultation, as we've heard, by a tribal nation to be a complaint against a proposed co-location. These clarifications will provide stakeholders with additional certainty. I thank my colleagues for their willingness to incorporate these changes into the draft program comment. For more than a decade, as we've heard, the FCC and a broad range of stakeholders have debated the best approach for resolving the regulatory status of Twilight Towers. So I'm glad that this commission is moving forward with a concrete solution that can open up these structures for additional wireless deployments. Doing so will help bring advanced wireless offerings to even more Americans. So I thank the staff of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau for their hard work on this item and for their broader efforts to streamline the deployment of wireless infrastructure. I look forward to continuing to make progress on these issues in the months to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
For too long, towers built during the twilight period have been caught in a regulatory quagmire. During this 4-year period from 2001 to 2005, both the Commission and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation were adjusting their rules to accommodate the need to facilitate the nationwide building of wireless infrastructure. But before any new policies were put in place, towers were put in the ground, and ever since, these facilities have been stuck in regulatory limbo. Today's proposal doesn't offer the time machine that Commissioner O'Reilly talked about, but it does try to bring an end to this ambiguity and make these towers available for co-location without sacrificing the ability to entertain meaningful objections or engage in tower-specific mitigation. This approach can benefit the First Responder Network Authority and other broadband providers seeking to swiftly deploy new infrastructure. It also can further historic preservation goals by limiting the need for additional towers. But I do think we still have a long way to go to honor our federal trust responsibility to tribal communities impacted by towers constructed during the twilight period. I concur today because I believe that our effort here is well-intended, but falls short of what is required. If we proceed with this draft proposal, I think we need to simultaneously update the Commission's statement of policy on establishing a government-to-government relationship between the agency and federally recognized tribes. This document has not been revisited since it was adopted more than a decade and a half ago. I think it's time to take on this task and do it in conjunction with resolving these long-standing issues of tower construction. In doing so, we can set a clear and updated course for Commission policy while also giving substance to tribal self-determination. And that, I believe, would be worth the effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Similar to the vampires in the Twilight series, for many of us at the Commission, Twilight Towers has seemed like an issue that simply would never die. But no more. Today, I am pleased that after more than a decade, the FCC is finally moving forward to address this longstanding problem. After many discussions with tribal representatives, industry, and other interested stakeholders, it is now clear that it is up to the FCC, working with our colleagues at the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, or ACHP, to finally solve this problem. And none too soon. The more rapidly we enable the additional use of this infrastructure, the sooner consumers everywhere can benefit from next-generation wireless services. It is my hope that this issue will be wrapped up at long last by the middle of next year. I appreciate the engagement of ACHP staff on this issue and look forward to working with them as we advance this and other wireless infrastructure issues. I would also like to thank my colleagues for their support on this item. In particular, thanks to Commissioner O'Reilly, who has long called for a resolution to this issue, and to Commissioner Carr for his continued leadership on our wireless infrastructure reform docket. And last but most, thanks to the staff who worked on this item. Paul Dari, Garnet Hanley, Eli Johnson, Dan Margolis, Dana Schaefer, Jill Springer, Jeff Steinberg, Don Stockdale, Cecilia Solhoff, Suzanne Tatro, and Mary Claire York from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Janet Seifert from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and Deborah Broderson, Linda Oliver, and Bill Richardson from the Office of General Counsel. Terrific work by all of you across these bureaus and offices. We'll now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Concur.
Chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks to the staff for the great work. Madam Secretary, could you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the fourth item on your agenda will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau and is entitled Restoring Internet Freedom. Chris Monteith, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Terrific. Ms. Monteith, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
I think it's still morning, so good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
The Wireline Competition Bureau presents for your consideration a declaratory ruling, report and order on restoring Internet freedom. The item would eliminate burdensome regulation that stifles innovation and deters investment and empower Americans to choose the broadband Internet access service that best fits their needs. I would like to thank the Competition Policy Division team for their amazing work on this proceeding. We also received invaluable input from our colleagues in the wireless telecommunications, consumer and governmental affairs, enforcement, media, and public safety and homeland security bureaus, as well as from the offices of General Counsel and Strategic Planning. Seated at the table with me from the Wireline Competition Bureau are Madeline Finley, Deputy Bureau Chief, Eric Ralph, Chief Economist, Daniel Kahn, Division Chief, Competition Policy Division, Melissa Kirkle, Assistant Division Chief, CPD, and Deborah Salins, Attorney Advisor, CPD. Joining me at the table from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau are Don Stockdale, Bureau Chief, and Neshe Gundelsberger, Deputy Bureau Chief, and from the Office of Strategic Planning, Jerry Ellig, Chief Economist. Deborah will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Morning.
This declaratory ruling, report and order takes several actions to restore Internet freedom. First, the declaratory ruling restores broadband Internet access service to its Title I Information Service classification. The item finds that reclassification as an information service best comports with the text and structure of the Communications Act, Commission precedent, and the Commission's policy objectives. In doing so, the item ends heavy-handed, utility-style regulation of the Internet in favor of a light-touch framework which worked for decades prior to 2015. The declaratory ruling also reinstates the private mobile service classification of mobile broadband Internet access service and returns to the Commission's definition of interconnected service that existed prior to 2015. The item restores the authority of the Federal Trade Commission to enforce consumer protection and antitrust laws. It also clarifies the effects of the return to an information service classification on other regulatory frameworks, including the need to apply a uniform federal regulatory approach to interstate information services like broadband Internet access service. Next, the report and order adopts a transparency rule that would require Internet service providers to disclose information about their practices to consumers, entrepreneurs and other small businesses, and the Commission. The item returns to the transparency rule the Commission adopted in 2010 with certain improvements to promote additional transparency. The report and order would also eliminate the Commission's conduct rules. Based on the record evidence, the item finds that the conduct rules are unnecessary because the transparency requirements, together with antitrust and consumer protection laws, ensures that Internet service providers engaging in behavior inconsistent with an open Internet can be held accountable. The actions taken in this item will advance the Commission's critical work to promote broadband deployment in rural America and infrastructure investment throughout the nation, brighten the future of innovation both within networks and at their edge, and move closer to the goal of eliminating the digital divide. The Bureau recommends adoption of this declaratory ruling, report and order, and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lance, for the presentation, and Ms. Monteith. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. Before beginning my statement, Mr. Chairman, I would like to note that Congressman Jerry McNerney, a member of the Congressional Committee that has oversight over this agency, requested the opportunity to speak today. He was denied, but I have a copy of a statement that the Congressman would have delivered had he been given the opportunity. And Mr. Chairman, respectfully, I would ask that you include this in the official record of this proceeding, if you will allow.
Without objection.
Thank you. I dissent. I dissent from this spirally spun, legally lightweight, consumer harming, corporate enabling, destroying Internet freedom order. I dissent because I am among the millions outraged. Outraged because the FCC pulls its own teeth, abdicating responsibility to protect the nation's broadband consumers. Now, some may ask, why are we witnessing such unprecedented groundswell of public support for keeping the 2015 net neutrality protections in place? Because the public can plainly see that a soon-to-be toothless FCC is handing the keys to the internet, one of the most remarkable, empowering, enabling inventions of our lifetime, over to a handful of multi-billion-dollar corporations. And if past is prologue, those very same broadband internet service providers that the majority says you should trust to do right by you will put profits and shareholders' returns above what is best for you. Each of us raised our hands when we were sworn in as FCC commissioners. We took an oath and promised to uphold our duties and responsibilities to, a liberal quote here, make available so far as possible to all the people of the United States without discrimination a rapid, efficient, nationwide, and worldwide wire and radio communication service with adequate facilities at reasonable charges. Today, the FCC majority is about to officially abandon that pledge, and millions are watching and taking note. I do not believe that there are any FCC or congressional offices immune to the deluge of consumer outcry. We are even hearing about state and local offices fielding calls. And what is newsworthy that at last count, and I think the number is rising, 5 Republican members of Congress went on the record in calling for a halt to today's vote. Why such a bipartisan outcry? Because the large majority of Americans are in favor of keeping strong net neutrality rules in place. But the saddest part to me about all of this, and it's painful for me to say this, that this is the new norm at the FCC. A norm where the majority ignores the will of the people. A norm where the majority stands idly by while the people that they are committed to serve, that they've taken an oath to serve, are about to lose so much. Now, we have heard story after story about what net neutrality means to consumers and small businesses, from places as diverse as Los Angeles Skid Row to Marietta, Ohio. I have here letters that just were sent to me that plead with the FCC to keep our net neutrality rules in place. But what is striking and in keeping with the new norm is that despite the millions of comments, letters, and calls received, this order cites not even one. That speaks volumes about the direction the current majority is heading, this FCC is heading, and that speaks volumes about just who is being heard at the FCC. Those sole proprietors whose entire business models depend on an open internet are worried that the absence of clear and enforceable net neutrality protections will result in higher costs and fewer benefits because, you see, they are not able to pay those tolls for premium access. Large online businesses have also weighed in expressing concerns about being subject to added charges as they simply try to reach their own customers. Engineers have submitted comments, including many of those internet pioneers. They shared with the FCC majority the fundamentals of how the internet works, because from where they sit, there is no way that an item like this would ever see the light of day if the majority understood the platform that some of them helped to create. I have heard from innovators worried that we are standing up a mother may I regime, where the broadband provider becomes the arbiter of acceptable online business models. And yes, I have heard from consumers who are worried, given that their broadband providers has already shown that they will charge inscrutable below-the-line fees, raise prices unexpectedly, and put consumers on hold for hours at a time, who will have their best interests at heart in a world without clear and enforceable rules, overseen by an agency without any clear authority. Would that agency be a toothless FCC? Now, there is a darker side to all of this that we have witnessed over the past few weeks. Threats and intimidation, personal attacks, Nazi cheering, Russian influence, fake comments. These are unacceptable. Some of these actions are illegal. They are all to be rejected. But what is also not acceptable is the FCC's refusal to cooperate with the state attorney general's investigations or allow evidence in the record that would undercut what can only be described as a preordained outcome. Now, many have been asking me, what happens next? How will all of this, net neutrality, my internet experience, look after today's decision? My answer is a simple one. When the current protections are abandoned and the rules that have been officially in place since 2015 are repealed, we will have a Cheshire Cat version of net neutrality. We will be in a world where regulatory substance fades to black, and all that is left is a broadband provider's toothy grin, because they have teeth, however you conjugate that. And those also comforting words, we have every incentive, don't worry, we have every incentive to do the right thing. But what they will soon have is every incentive to do their own thing. Now, the results of throwing out net neutrality protections may not be felt right away. Most of us will get up tomorrow morning, get ready for work, and over the next week, wade through what would be, no doubt, hundreds of headlines. We will grow tired of those hundreds of headlines. We will grow tired hearing from endless prognosticators, and we will quickly submerge ourselves into a sea of holiday bliss. But what we have wrought today will one day be apparent, and by then, when you really wake up and see what has changed, I fear it may be too late to do anything about it, because there will be no agency empowered to address your concerns. This item insidiously ensures that the FCC will never be able to fully grasp the harm it may have unleashed on the internet ecosystem. And that inability might lead decision makers to conclude that the next internet startup that failed to flourish, that attempted to seek relief by whatever authority may or may not be in charge, with many teeth they might have left, simply that maybe they just had a bad business plan, when in fact the actual culprit was the absence of a level playing field online. Particularly damning is what today's repeal would mean for marginalized groups like communities of color that rely on platforms like the internet to communicate. You see, traditional outlets rarely, if ever, consider their issues or concerns worthy of coverage. It was through social media, remember, that the world first heard about Ferguson, Missouri, because those legacy outlets did not consider them worthy enough for coverage until that hashtag started trending. It has been through online video services that targeted entertainment ecosystems thrive, where stories are finally being told because those very same programs that were submitted for consideration were rejected time and time again by mainstream media and distribution, mainstream distribution and media outlets. And it has been through secure messaging platforms where activists have communicated and organized for justice without gatekeepers who may or may not have differing opinions blocking them. Where will the next significant attack on internet freedom come from? Maybe from a broadband provider allowing its network to congest, making a high-traffic video provider ask what more can it pay to make that pain go away? That will never happen, you say? Newsflash, it already has. The difference now is the open question of what is stopping them. The difference after today's vote is that no one will be able to stop them. Maybe several providers will quietly roll out paid prioritization packages that will enable deep pocket players to cut the queue. Maybe a vertically integrated broadband provider decides that it will favor its own apps and services, or some high-value Internet of Things traffic will be subject to an additional fee. Maybe some of these actions will be cloaked under non-disclosure agreements and wrapped up in mandatory arbitration clauses so that it will be a breach of contract to disclose these publicly or take the provider to court if there is any wrongdoing. Some may say, of course this will never happen. But after today's vote, what will be in place to stop any of this? What we do know is that broadband providers did not even wait for the ink to dry on a proposed order before making their moves. One broadband provider who had in the past promised to not engage in paid prioritization has now quietly dropped that promise from its list of commitments on its website. What's next? Blocking or throttling? That will never happen, you say? After today's vote, exactly who is the cop on the beat? Ecosystems. Government services have migrated online, as have educational opportunities, job notices, and applications. But at the same time, broadband providers have continued to consolidate. They have become bigger. They own their own content. They own their own media companies. And they own or have interest in other types of competing services. So why are millions of Americans so alarmed? Because they understand the risk this all poses. And even though